Come on in, y'all. Come on in. Let's talk about this. This is important. This is important. Oh, this is important. Let's talk about the great con to the way, eh? Yeah, and it's a rainy day here in Chicago. It's a rainy night in Georgia. Well, Chicago, that is. Yeah, it's on. It's on and popping. Go ahead and hit the share button if you can. And let's talk about this. Let's talk about this. It's going to upset some folks. And Jimmy Crack, corn, and I don't care. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hello, everybody. So welcome to the Sir Walter Jones Show. I'm he. It is Wednesday. Wednesday. It is the day that the Lord has made. Let us rejoice. Come on, y'all, be glad in it. I'm Sir Walter, the Sir Walter Jones Show. How y'all is? Come on in. The water is fine. I want to talk about a man, a brother, and someone who we all have known. Those of you who live in Chicago, you know a lot about this man, this brother, and he branched his ministry out there into the world and the stratosphere for all of you to enjoy his hip-hop music. We're calling this the Miseducation of Kanye West. Yes, sir. The Miseducation of Kanye West. This is the West Chronicles. And I want to talk about some things here to kind of help y'all catch y'all up on this man, his life, and why is he upsetting you people the way he is thus far. It's amazing how so many black artists and activists and Hollywood stars and what have you are dividing the people, African-American people, black folks, colored folks. I don't know what you call yourself today, but you're divided because of what one of your patriots are saying or what they're doing. And it seems like some are turning on us, others are flowing within us, which is causing us to be divided. For instance, the Snoop Dogg has caused a division within us because he has taken what we hold so dear as gospel music, and he is sharing it with the world by, anyway, that's another show. We did that. And then there's Kanye West, who seems to be rallying and celebrating and applauding the great Donald Trump, and he's putting on the hat to make America great again, and he's saying that him and Donald Trump are alike in many ways. That is dividing us. Oh, I see there's outsiders that talk about him, it's hell out there. I'm not saying it's hell, H-E, I mean H-A, it's hell out there. Maybe y'all can hear it. I see some, it looked like a few golf balls and fell out of it. It must be apropos that I talk about this right now. Okay, so let's get this ball and crack-a-lackin' and let's see if I can figure out what Kanye or Omari West, this is his name. He's a June baby, 1977, a young man. He's an American rapper, actually, a songwriter, entrepreneur, fashion designer, and he is among the most acclaimed rappers of the 21st century. He's one of the best, actually. This is something that's not so he expressed this, but it's not a dishonest expression, although someone else should celebrate you. He is the best-selling artist, one, that is, of all time. He really is, believe it or not. For those of you Christians who don't know anything about his record sales, he's sold over more than 100 million digital downloads and 21 million albums worldwide. He's huge. And so y'all ask, why is he so relevant? Why are we even listening to him? Because a man who's got that kind of sale, that kind of product out there, that kind of units out there, and your children are buying his records, he have an influence over their minds. You better pay attention, stop ignoring him. He has won a total of 21 Grammy Awards, making him one of the most award artists of all time, and the most Grammy Award artists to have debuted in the 21st century. This man is huge. And 3 of his albums have been included and ranked Rolling Stone's 2012 update of the 500 greatest albums of all time list. Yeah. And he was also, he's been included in a number of Forbes annual lists. Time named him one of the 100 most influential people in the world in 2005 and then in 2015. So again, don't ignore this man. Don't ignore his rants either, because your children are taking it as law and his truth become their truth. And this man is a piper to your children, and he's leading them out of your house. Born in Atlanta, actually, but he was raised here in Chicago. He briefly attended art school before becoming known as a producer for Rockefeller Records in the early 2000s, for those of you who are my age and around there. Produced hit singles for artists such as Jay-Z, Alicia Keys, and intent on pursuing a solo career as a rapper. That's what he's doing. He released his debut album, The College Dropout, in 2004 to widespread critical and commercial success, and founded the record label Good Music. He went on to pursue a variety of styles in subsequent albums, and this goes on and on. But I want to get down to some of the controversial things that we see popping up quite a bit in the life of this man, and his relationships and his personal life, and on and on. And it has been said that he has some mental issues. Okay. Go to the controversies here. He's been outspoken. He's always a controversial celebrity throughout his career. He's always, whenever he opens his mouth, it's disturbing. He received both criticism and praise from many, including the mainstream media. But in 2005 is when the world recognized who he was. He deviated from the prepared script to criticize the media portrayed of this was in hurricane relief on NBC. I think he was standing next to, was it Mike Myers or somebody, and the federal response to black hurricane victims. He criticized President George Bush. He said that George Bush don't care about black folks, and you can see his co-host at the time, he just looked funny. He didn't know what to say, and they cut to something else. In 2008, he said he will go down in history as the voice of this generation, a comment that was widely ridiculed, notably in the South Park. There was a South Park episode called Fish Sticks that ridiculed him. Then in September 2013, West was widely rebuked by human rights groups for performing in Kazakhstan. I remember that, which has one of the poorest human rights records in the world. Yes, at the wedding of an authoritative president that I can't pronounce the president's name, anyway, his grandson. Other notable Western performers, including Sting, canceled, but not this man. November 2013 radio interview, West explained why he believed that President Obama had problems pushing policies in Washington. He said, "Man, let me tell you something about George Bush and all oil money and Obama and no money. People want to say Obama can't make these moves or he's not executing. That's because he ain't got those connections. Black people don't have the same level of connections as Jewish people, and we ain't Jewish. We don't get, he said, we don't got family that got money like that." In his response to the comment, the Anti-Defamation League made a statement, and there it goes again, the age-old canard that Jews are all powerful and control the levers of power and government, and that big fight went on for a little while. Then in February of 2016, we're getting close, y'all. I'm gonna catch y'all up to current events. West again became enthralled in the controversy when he posted a tweet seemingly asserting Bill Cosby's innocence in the wake of over 50 women making allegations of sexual assault directed at Bill Cosby. In 2016 May, controversy was when he described the slavery of African Americans in the United States as a choice. 2018, I'm sorry, just a couple of days ago. When you hear about slavery for 400 years, he says, that sounds like a choice. He was talking on, of course, TMZ. And Van Lathan, I think that's his name, checked him mightily. All right. I think one of the things I didn't mention was when he disrupted the award show and grabbed the mic and said that Beyonce has the most something, she's the most, whatever he said. And that's when we realized. And then he was on the award show a few years later. Then he said he was running for president, and they allowed him to do this rant. So, you know, the world just allowed him to do stuff, and we all get punished for it. Our ears get punished for it. Over the course of his career, West has been known to compare himself to various influential figures and entities in art and culture. So he has compared himself to Steve Jobs, Socrates, Walt Disney, Andy Warhol, Michael Jackson, Howard Hughes, Leonardo da Vinci, Nike, Kurt Cobain, William Shakespeare, Thomas Edison, Pablo Picasso, Jim Morrison, Willy Wonka, David Stern, Braveheart, Jim Hendrix, Michelangelo, Ralph Lauren, and he said that he's also Google. Yes. Yes. Many awards. Not going to read all of the awards. But his personal life, his on and off relationships, of course, with women. Alex Pfeiffer, a designer, 2002. They was engaged 2006, ended their relationships, and then he was dating model Amber Rose, 2008, and then 2012 he began dating now wife Kim Kardashian. All right, and we see there was a private ceremony in I think it was, where was it, in France? I believe it was. But on November 2007, it hit us hard here in Chicago because his mother, Donda West, died at age 58, died at a young age. In January 2008, the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office said that West had died on coronary artery disease and multiple post-operative factors from or as a consequence of liposuction. That's how his mother, they said, part reason why she died, liposuction and mammoplasty. West played his first concert following the funeral at the O2 in London in November 22. Some of you remember that performance. And he dedicated his performance of Hey Mama and Journey's Don't Stop Believing. California Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger subsequently signed the Donda West law, legislating which makes it mandatory for patients to receive medical clearance through a physical examination before undergoing elective cosmetic surgery. Yes. Also, and then he went into some, actually, the Robert Evel Knievel sued Kanye West because of a video that he did that was portraying Evel Knievel and his suit in a negative, in a sexual light. And I think they eventually settled. In 2014, after an altercation with the paparazzi at Los Angeles airport, West was sentenced to serve 2 years probation for misdemeanor battery conviction and was required to attend 24 anger management sessions. 24 anger management sessions. This should tell y'all what's probably going on in the life and the mind of Kanye West. He performed 250 hours of community service and paid restitution to the photographer. His religious beliefs, after the success of his song Jesus Walks, which got a little cussing in it from the album College Dropout, he was questioned on his beliefs, and he says, I will say that I'm spiritual. And then later on he says that he is definitely a Christian. And last but not least, his mental state, 2010, for a screening of his of his movie, that is Runaway, he told the audience he once considered suicide. And in his song FML and his featured verse on Vic Mensa's song You Mad, he refers to using the antidepressant medication Lexapro. And in the song I Feel Like That, which has not been officially released, he mentioned feeling many common symptoms of depression and anxiety. And these songs had all been recorded during West recording sessions, all right? He has some issues that recently we found out that liposuction. One of the stories went forth was that I think at the wedding, his brother-in-law, one of those, was teased because he seemed to be a little obese, and he was teased, and so he left early to go back home. And now that Kanye West was getting a little fat himself, he didn't want to go through what his brother-in-law went through with the public shame, and so he began to do this liposuction and then take these opioids, okay? In an interview in 2008, West declared that he became addicted to opioids when they were prescribed to him after his liposuction, and the addiction contributed to his nervous breakdown in 2006, okay? And this is our dear brother in whom we have to continue to pray for, because again, the mind is a terrible thing to waste. Some have said that this man is hypersensitive and paranoia, and of course, I made the post today about his relationship with Donald Trump as it compares to mentality, and I believe they both are narcissists, okay? One might be a little more narcissistic than the other one. I think Trump might win the prize. And I will side with some of you who are saying that Kanye West is doing these things for market reasons and things like that. I believe both of them are doing it for market reasons, for sure, for promotional reasons. But I think what they're trying to do for market reasons is really who they are, in a sense. It's like real life. It's like, what's the old saying about fiction? I can't think of it right now. Eagle Man says, no, white people came, slaves in Africa. I came from, I don't know what you were talking about. I don't know what you're saying here. Kanye's mental state hasn't been the same since his mother passed. Brentic, and most people believe it was because of the death of his mother. Now, and then some disagree with it, of course. Again, there's going to be a division among African Americans. But let me tell you about the famous people with mental illness, and maybe we can make a coalition here. And kind of some of you who are a psychologist out there, I'm trying to study it myself so that I can better my understanding on what it is. And you Christians out there, and this is taboo for you, because I truly believe in my heart of hearts that many Christians who go to church are mentally ill. And I also believe that mental illness run rampant among the leadership, pastors and elders and evangelists and prophets and apostles and teachers and missionaries and all these people. I believe that many of them do exemplify a mental illness in a sense. There is a dysfunction, there's a difference. There's a mental dysfunction that's happening, and many of it is attributed to a molestation or a beating from maybe parents. There was, I believe that in some cases, there was not a full growth in the mind. There was not a full development in the mind. And number 3 or number 4, I don't know what number I'm in, I believe that many people went into ministry as to overcompensate for this mental anguish, whether it was something dealing with their physics, their physique, the physiological, the ramifications of this. It's a whole lot of stuff that I can kind of dig into. And I've met these people, male and female, where they seem like they were manic depressed or bipolar. They'll say one thing one time, and then a few minutes later, they didn't remember what they said. They said another thing. They contradict themselves. And I've seen anxiety attacks from these leaders. Okay, some of you have experienced them yourselves. Many of gifted people suffer from mental illness. Yes, sir, Brentic, you are right. Art imitates. Thank you, Beatrice. Art imitates life, or truth is stranger than fiction. Beatrice, you just saved the show, because I was like, how do I say this? Famous people with mental illness. Number 1, Prince Henry, believe it or not, had a mental breakdown. When did he have a mental breakdown? I need y'all to put in the comments before I answer. This is Prince Henry. Y'all know who he is. You know who his brother is, okay? Prince Henry had a mental breakdown. Let me ask y'all a question. When did you think the mental breakdown happened? And do you see a correlation here? Number 2, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson had 3 bouts of depression since college. Ryan Reynolds dealt with anxiety because of disappointing fans over his movie Deadpool. Like Kanye, he needs to be validated and celebrated like Donald Trump. And that type of spirit and that type of mental anguish can't take criticism. And so the anxiety pops up, okay? And Ryan Reynolds, as gifted as he is as an actor, he slipped into depression or anxiety because there were some of his fans who didn't like his role. When his mother got killed, Barbara says, I think when his mom was killed. Yes, Prince Harry had a mental breakdown after the death of Princess Diana. Number 4, Kendrick Lamar, who broke a record this year by being the first rapper to win a Pulitzer Prize, struggles with depression and suicidal thoughts. And 3 of his friends were murdered one summer. And I need y'all to understand, many of these kids are killing each other in the streets of Chicago because they witnessed killings and mayhem. They witnessed murders, and they never been dealt with. Notice when a kid goes into school and shoot up everybody, okay, as many as he can, mostly Caucasian schools, predominantly Caucasian schools, a Caucasian kid go in there and shoot up everybody. What happens after that? The city or what do you call it? The board, the educational board, whatever the city is, they go and get counselors, don't they? Whenever there's a tragic event that happens among white people, counselors are called in free of charge. These kids are witnessing murder after murder in the streets of Chicago, and they're not being counseled. Yeah, they're not being counseled. So then, what do that kid grow up to be? Gabby Sidibe, remember her? Sidibe, she a really heavy-set young lady. What was the movie? What was her movie where she was being abused by the mother, the comedian woman who was talking about how the Netflix thing. Y'all remember the movie. Anyway, she struggled with depression in college and developed bulimia because of her depression. Wayne Brady, the one who's always smiling. He seems like he's happy when he's asleep, he's happy. It gets in their heads and they feel responsible. Johanna, that's it. That's it. Yeah, Precious. Thank you. The movie Precious. Thank you, Johanna. And Tony and yeah, Monique. Barbara saying Monique. But anyway, Wayne Brady suffers with depression. He says he's not as happy as people think that he is. Emma Stone said she was a very, very, very anxious child. James Franco said, I have a very addictive personality. John Hamm he completed a 30-day program for alcohol abuse, talked about the benefits of therapy and antidepressants in his battle with chronic depression. Lady Gaga revealed she suffers from post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. Lady Gaga, one of the most talented artists out there among blacks and whites. All right. Now she's up there with. Now, if you want to put it in a race among color, then it's among white artists, especially female. I believe Lady Gaga is the most talented and the most gifted among white artists. Why? Because she can actually sing and play and write. Lady Gaga, as wild as the wild outfits and the crazy stuff and the controversial things that she may do, part of that, of course, is publicity, but I think part of that is her. Catherine Zeta-Jones was diagnosed with bipolar II disorder. Mel Gibson, bipolar disorder. Brooke Shields, postpartum depression. Michael Phelps, diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, that's ADHD. Jim Carrey, depression and ADHD. Halle Berry had too many men problems. And because of her men problems, it led to her thoughts of suicide. Halle Berry. And I'm getting ready to do a show on that particular thing about people who are afraid. I'm not saying she was afraid, but I'm getting ready to do a show, hopefully this week, about people, especially men. And I'm going to do a two-day show. One, men who are afraid of the woman they're with, and women who are afraid of the men that they're with. And it turns into psychological bondage. I'm trying to tell y'all, this is going to be one of my very, 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 very important ones. Okay, all right, Deatrice, you're way ahead of me. Slow down. Yes, there are so many types of depression. Johanna Bright says many comedians became comedians to hide depression. Deatrice, trust me, y'all. Many musicians as well are great, brilliant experts at what they do in musicianship. Some of them are geniuses, but they live in a bubble. They go home and they want to be alone. They are very promiscuous. They got women everywhere. Okay, they live in miserable lives. But when you see them on Sunday, you see the supposed anointing on their lives, and they can tear church down. But when they leave there, you follow them throughout the week, and you will see a raggedy life for many of the musicians. Again, these guys are not being counseled. They see some things. Some things have happened to them. Things happen to me as well. So many of us have depression and are not diagnosed. Yep. And Johanna, she says, know the symptoms. Essen Smith says, when you witness murder or horrific events, it is engraved in your mind, it replays in your mind, and it eats at your mind and moral fiber. And the more you witness it, your spirit is broken at the constant imbalance of horror, fear, sadness, anger. Woo, wow. PTSD is not even considered in urban communities, but it is a plague in our communities. Essen Smith, wow, it's taboo. We don't talk about it. Maybe we don't. Look what the Bright says. Johanna says you need to recognize it. Yeah, Bears, you called my name out. We fight through it, and it is exhausting. We fight through it. And again, many of our forefathers of our churches, they fought through it. And you looked at their actions as being Holy Ghost filled. I don't think y'all understand that. I did a show called Mental Illness is in Your Praise. It upset some people, but I had to tell them what I saw in the churches. When we see many of the people in the churches who are doing these, seem to be operating in spiritual gifts, many of that actually is a mental illness, I believe. Even many people who are speaking in tongues. I'm not talking about the ones that are genuine, because I don't believe that tongues have ceased. I just believe that we have abused tongues. But I see people who are dealing in the ecclesiastic corporate worship, and they're exemplifying these mental illnesses, and you don't know it. The family do. The family do. Yes, sir, Lavelle. Tuesday it is. Kurt says, I thought this was the miseducation of Kanye West, not mental illness of Kanye West. Kurt Bourne, you keep paying attention, you might learn something today on this show. What he says here, where did I stop? Mel Gibson, bipolar. Brooke Shields, postpartum depression. Michael Phelps did that. Jim Carrey did that. Halle Berry did that. Katy Perry, suicidal thoughts. Gabrielle Union, all right? I think one of the finest women out there. Fine means nothing. PTSD due to her sexual assault. Johanna says, I think Kanye is having mental illness issues. Pastors need to be able to go to someone to speak with. Yep, I believe it. Did you listen to the whole interview on TMZ? Bears Bolton, yes, I did. I heard the whole interview. Why'd you ask that question, Bears? Tell me why you asked that question. Stars who committed suicide, because I know I kind of know where y'all going, and I know where y'all think I'm going, but I might go another way with you. Somebody mentioned, I think it was Deatrice mentioned Robin Williams hung himself in 2014. Kurt Cobain, gunshot. Jovan Belcher, he's a Kansas City Chiefs linebacker. He first shot his girlfriend, and then he went to where his coach was, and he killed himself in front of the coach. Don Cornelius, love, peace, and soul. Yes, he shot himself in the head. His health was declining, and he suffered with multiple seizures because I think he had an aneurysm a few years back prior to his death. Aaron Hernandez took his life after being convicted as a convicted killer. There's some patterns here. We look at the SNL actors who died from Saturday Night Live. Okay, Belushi and the other one who acted like Belushi years later, really heavy set and was used a lot of slapstick. What's his name? Was it Farley or someone? Okay. What are you saying here? Lady Michelle says, today's generation has become desensitized to the killing. It has been accepted as their norm because it's all they see. Before they can address one killing another, one happens so they became numb. Yep. And it is destroying them mentally. Many are suffering in silence. Yep. And there's a desensitization going on as well, I believe. We take it for granted because we are not emotionally attracted until it's too late. Attached. I said attracted. Sorry. Attached. Now, let's talk about Kanye's TMZ. All right. He sat between the two men and he was ranting about his facts. Here's a word that I'm seeing a lot of you using. My truth. My truth. Yeah, maybe I think y'all know I'm getting ready to go here. Bear says, I think he doesn't know how to communicate his actual thoughts. I knew you were going there. It took me the whole 40 minutes and listened to T.I. on the Breakfast Club to understand what he was trying to say. Yep. When he said it, I knew exactly what he was saying. This is where I'm going. The symptoms of depression presents in drugs and alcohol use, promiscuity, anger. Yep. He was talking to them and he was giving what he felt were facts. Donald Trump do the same thing. I believe in my heart of hearts that many men who have these issues up here, it appears that they're lying, and they are lying. But in their minds, some of it is on purpose lying, and others is they can't help themselves. Some of them do these lying and believe that they are telling the truth. I believe there are people who do so much lying that after a while, those lies become truth to them. Romans chapter 1 talks about God turning you over to it because you don't want to stop what you're doing. So he's turned you up and over to a reprobate mind so that you're in it and don't even realize you're in it. I'm not saying that Kanye and Trump and others are a reprobate. We don't know what a reprobate look like. But I believe that they lie so much till their lie becomes their truth. And that's why I keep hearing y'all say, my truth, my truth. There's only one truth. It's not your truth. It's your statement, maybe what you think is facts, or it might be your opinion, but there's only one truth, all right? So we began to use these new age terminologies to express ourselves, and we're borrowing from worldly terminologies, and we have to be careful not to take on also the spirit of the terminology and the spirit of even the clothing and the style, okay, and the music and all that stuff. That's another show. But we take on those terms and we don't realize that we're taking on the spirit behind the terms, if that makes any sense to any of you. So these men who are narcissistic, they lie. The public know they're lying, but sometimes they get some kind of clearance. I don't know what it is. Kanye West was trying to express himself like sometimes I do, but I'm not exactly, I can't really. For instance, one time I was in church and they only gave us 2 minutes to do a 2-minute sermon, and I said that the ailment that comes upon us is given to you by the devil, but then the devil heals you. And then I heard a gasp over the church because I said the devil heals you. And I sat down because the clock ended and I sat down. And I heard that gasp, but it was too late for me to go back and try and fix and explain what I said. What I meant, that is. Are you hearing me, Barris Bolton? I'm going by what your comment is, him not being able to express himself. Okay? I said that the devil heals you. If they had gave me one more minute, I would have told them that don't get caught up in how I said it. But what I meant was, if the devil is put an ailment on you and then he takes it away from you, did he not heal you of it? What does healing mean? And so what we done is we got caught in the terminology or the meaning of the word. For instance, if I said, hey, there's a plate over there. Can you go and fetch that plate and bring it to me? You would get offended if I told any of y'all to fetch the plate, because we have placed fetched with dog. But fetch simply means to go and retrieve something and bring it back. For the same reason why I can't say that I'm gay today. In the 70s, I could say it all day long and they knew that I meant that I was happy. Understand what I'm saying? So when I said healed, then it caused people to say, how dare you? That's heresy. And they wanted to report me because they thought I was teaching a heretic message. And I had to later on explain myself that the devil does not have the power, supernatural power, to heal like God does. But what I'm saying, what I was trying to say is that if he put a ailment on you, then he just released it from you. The Bible talks about that Saul had an evil spirit on him. David played it, and it said that an evil spirit from the Lord. Ooh, and that right there confuses people when we're reading it. Says an evil spirit from the Lord, yet other scripture says there is no evil in God. How could God give evil when there is no evil in him? And did God give Saul an evil spirit? No, he didn't. An evil spirit from the Lord meant something else. God's presence, and wherever God's presence is removed. Okay, I don't think I'll get it. I can't explain it because then I'll get Kurt fussing that I didn't get back to Kanye West. No Christian counseling, no church training, no taking time to cleanse. Come on, Aaron Phillips, you preach it, man. So he had to explain in the Twitter feed what he meant. So it looks like, was there a flip-flop there? Did he change on his message because of the public outcry? Or did he really change, or did he further explain what he said in Twitter? Old Testament versus New Testament, understanding the difference. Yep, there you go, Johan. And not just Old Testament, New Testament, but also King James vernacular can cause many Christians to be confused. He mentioned that slavery was a choice because we outnumbered our oppressors. I have a list of North American slave revolts here on my list here. Many of these revolts were from whites, abolitionists, I will agree. Some of them were not in America, I will agree. But here's a list here. New York Slave Revolt 1712 was an uprising in New York, in the British province of New York, of 23 enslaved Africans. And they killed 9 whites and injured another 6 before they were stopped. And more than 3 times that number of blacks. 70 were arrested and jailed. Of those, 27 were put on trial and 21 convicted, and they were executed. That's the New York Slave Revolt of 1712. There was a Samba rebellion in 1731. There was a Stono rebellion of 1737, sometimes called the Cato's conspiracy. It was a slave rebellion that began on the 9th of September 1739 in the colony of South Carolina, and it was the largest slave uprising in the British mainland of the colonies, with 25 white people and 35 to 50 black people killed. And the uprising was led by Native Americans who were likely from the Central Africa Kingdom of Congo, as some of the rebels spoke Portuguese. There was the New York slave insurrection of 1741. There was the 1791 Mena conspiracy, the Point Coupe conspiracy 1794. There was the Gabriel's conspiracy of 1800. There was the Igbo landing slave escapes 1803. The Chatham Manor Rebellion 1805. 1811 German Coast Uprising 1811. The Apante conspiracy in 1812. I think that happened in Cuba, actually. George Boxley Rebellion, 1815. George Berkeley was a white slave owner, by the way. So that's why I said a couple of these are whites. Denmark Vesey, remember him? Conspiracy in 1822. Nat Turner Slave Rebellion, most of us know, 1831. Black Seminole Slave Rebellion, 1839, all the way to 1838. I'm sorry, 1835 to 1838. The Amistad seizure, give us free, yeah. Amistad seizure, 1839. The Creole case, 1841. That was the most successful in U.S. history, was the Creole case in 1841. 1842, slave revolt in the Cherokee Nation. John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry, we know about that in 1859. It was a failed attempt to organize a slave rebellion. There were slave rebellions and revolts forever, and many of them were so small that it didn't make the list. So to say that there was a choice was an uneducated statement, and this is why I'm calling this the miseducation of Kanye West, because Kanye do not read. And out of his own mouth, he has stated that he get things from his brain, and he, like Donald Trump, do not read. Yes, he don't read. And I believe there are brilliant men out there. I wouldn't call him a genius, y'all. Y'all are calling him a genius, but you have to be careful calling a man a genius, because he's not. I do not believe that he's Stevie Wonder is a genius. You hear what I'm saying? Kanye's not a genius. Now, he's a genius to this generation because of that music. So I got it. We can go back and forth in court on who's a genius compared to what generation we live in. And I get that whole narrative and fight. All right, because if you ask this generation who's the greatest guitar player opposed to my generation who's a great guitar player, you're going to get two different lists. All right, they're going to name somebody who was playing guitar in the 1990s, 2000s. This generation, my generation, I have to go back to the 1960s. All right, and this is just the way it is. Yes, Johanna said that was my assumption. Okay, so I believe that even geniuses have struggles in the mind. I think one reason why they're such a genius, because there is a when a blind person, like for instance Ray Charles, Stevie Wonder, and all these guys. Who's the guy? Who's that blind guy who wrote the song Chico? Da 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 da, Chico and the Man, and Feliz Navidad. Yeah, these blind people, they're blind, but they have an amazing hearing perception. It's just like people who can't hear, but their eyes are even a sensory more stronger. When one body part is missing, the other body part is strengthened. Okay? Ooh, that's the whole body of Christ type thing that I could bring up as a part 2 of 1 Corinthians chapter 13 or 14 it is. Okay? Yeah, he meant systematic slavery, or he changed it to that after debating. Barris Bolton, there it is. There it is. And that's where I'm going to, because after what he said, he didn't have much, he didn't take that much time to explain what he meant by that. He had to go to Twitter, and then he told you it was about a mental. Y'all mentioned Harriet Tubman, who carried a rifle, not so much afraid to keep the white man, a slave master, away, but she carried the rifle to intimidate the slaves who was enslaved in the mind. Now I get it. Part of that was his point. Geniuses like the blind have spatial thinking. Yes. Johanna, can you come in here and teach us with me? Because you doing it. All right. Let me tell you the number one myth. As we heard Kanye West, here's your number one myth. Only a small percentage of Southerners own slaves. That is the number one myth of any teaching on slavery. I believe that is the number one myth, is that a small percentage of them owned it. See, what he said was, it was so many of us, how could we not have banded together to revolt against whites in slavery? Well, closely, it says here, the idea that the vast majority of Confederate soldiers were men of modest means rather than large plantation owners is usually used to reinforce the contention that the South wouldn't have gone to war to protect slavery. The 1860 census shows, now listen to this and watch this. The 1860 census shows that in the states that would soon succeed from the Union, an average of more than 32% of white families owned slaves. 32%. Some states had far more slave owners. 46% in South Carolina, 49% in Mississippi, while some had far less, 20% maybe in Arkansas. But as Jamil Bouye and Rebecca Onion pointed out in Slate, that's a publication, the percentages don't fully express the extent to which the antebellum South was a slave society built on a foundation of slavery. Many of those white families who couldn't afford slaves aspired to, as a symbol of wealth and prosperity. They couldn't get any slaves, but they wanted to. So because they wanted to, they still had the masses slave mentality. In addition, the essential ideology of white supremacy that served as a rationale for slavery made it extremely difficult and terrifying for white Southerners to imagine life alongside a black majority population that was not in bondage. In this way, many non-slave owning Confederates went to war to protect not only slavery, but to preserve the foundation of the only way of life that they knew. And it makes me laugh when I hear people say, like Kanye and others say, how dare the slaves allow such an atrocity to happen to them for so long? It's funny how people think that because you know who you are today, because you've come to a knowledge of truth today, because you have more freedom today, you're now in a mindset to think that you'd be thinking that way in the 1700s, in the 1600s, in the 1800s during slavery. You still have that mentality. So you yourself would have got all these people together to do a revolt and ended slavery. Ain't no white man gonna tell me what to do, master my behind. All this talk about what you wouldn't have done during slavery. Why? Because of where you are right now. Psychological here. It's called the Willie Lynch letter. It was the most powerful letter at the time, and it was a way to enslave their minds. And if you get them when they're born and attack their minds, when they get older, they will believe that this is supposed to be, this is the way of life, and God ordained it to be so. And then they went to scriptures and proved it to you that slavery is a way of life, and you obey your master. Once you get a man enthralled, and I think this is what Kanye was trying to say, then there you have it. But if they're enslaved in their minds, then Kanye contradicted, this statement makes no sense. If their mind is controlled, then how can they rebel if they feel that this is supposed to be how they should live? Makes no sense. I mean, y'all understand what I'm saying? If he fixed what he said on TMZ on Twitter, then it makes no sense to say that they choose to be in slavery. But then to say, okay, the slaves outnumber the slave masters, but masters owned all the guns, Brentic says. Yes, again, his ideology is off because he doesn't read. Yep, slavery became a psychological hold on the whites who didn't own slaves. Yep, I train up a child in the way it should go. Come on, he'll not depart from it. And this is exactly it. You can't escape a system like that because look at the Jim Crow laws. All right, move it up into the 19th century, 20th century. In the 1900s, the Jim Crow laws were really strong, especially in the South. Look at all those black people that was born back then in the 1900s, okay? Look at millions now of black people on the earth, all right? Shouldn't they now, with this new freer mind, be able to overtake these laws? Look how long it took them, though. There was a civil rights bill that was passed in the 1860s. It took 100 years. 1960, was it 64 or something like that? a civil rights bill went forth by, what's his name? Lyndon Baines Johnson. It took 100 years to end some of the tyranny of the Jim Crow. And just because you pass a law don't mean the mentality of Jim Crow went out the door as well. Do you not know I'm the second child in my family? There's 9 children. I'm the second child in my family who experienced full rights and privileges in America. Yeah. I'm the second child in my family. My parents didn't experience it. My grandparents don't know how it feels to be born in America and then have all rights given to them. I have full rights and privileges. I was born into full rights and privileges. 1964, that the Voter Rights Act, once that was passed, then that gave us all full privileges. All right? I don't think I understand where I'm going here. What he's saying still exists in the older generation. Yes. Now watch. That whole perpetuation of the Willie Lynch letter and keeping the mentality of the slaves down and depressed. And I believe some of them, not many of them, had Stockholm syndrome. Okay? But there were so many more of them that God has given to them the wisdom and knowledge and understanding that this is not right. And that's why many of them did revolt. Others were just patient, and they did obey their masters until the right time. And I believe many of them were smart and intelligent, like a Frederick Douglass. And they were so intelligent that they also were able, in the slave position, manipulate their masters to get them to do things that they didn't know why they were doing it for the slaves. They used wisdom. I believe God used the slaves, many of them. I don't think we don't even look past that. Okay? So I believe that Kanye is uneducated. And it's not so much because he didn't go to school. He went to art school, he went to high school. I mean, I'm sure he got some schooling, but he refused to further his education. Like Trump. He don't read. He just don't. It was a process to break the spirit of African people. I visited the slave castles, and the dungeons are etched in the mind. The floors are still stained in our ancestors' blood. And I will never forget it because it is like sorrow hovers over that place. Roots and the history books don't even begin to capture the atrocities of the voyage. When I saw the shackles that were mere torture devices that ripped through the flesh, I cringe. It is an experience I will never forget. And since I do not take for granted the fight our ancestors endured. Essen Smith, woo, you doing it. That's a good word. Johanna says, let's not forget many were trying to protect their children who could be taken from them if they rebelled or worse hung. Johanna, hard truth. And that's my point. And that's why so many are against West, his so-called argument, because to say that it was a choice, is interpreted two ways. Number one, we choose to, which means we wanted to because we felt that we couldn't have a better life without white oppression, without master, without the farm, okay, without the slave quarters, or without the big house, without the garden, okay. So we felt we couldn't survive. So we choose to just stay in this slavery. Some will interpret it that way. Barbara says, if there is such a thing, I know his mom, Dr. West, is turning over in her grave right now because of the foolishness and the skewed mindset of her son. Absolutely. And it's a shame. I put on the wall about the Jews. The Jews, Genesis chapter 15, I believe it is. God went to Abraham and he told Abraham that your people, you're going to have children and you're going to have seed, and your seed is going to be they're going to be strangers in a land, is what God told Abraham. What God was trying to do was set Abraham up with a covenant. And he told Abraham to gather up these animals And Abraham did, and he split these animals in half, okay? And God pretty much walked through these animals. It was a covenant that God could not erase. He couldn't get rid of this covenant. Somebody asked me a question of what's the difference between a contract and a covenant. Well, this was not a contract. This was a covenant. They're difficult, almost impossible to break. There is a salt covenant and there's a blood covenant. You got a salt bag, I got a salt bag, and I put my salt in your bag and you shake it up. There's no way for me to go back and get that salt. It's almost impossible. Hold on, y'all. Let me sign off over here, Urban Broadcast Media. Hey, everybody. Y'all have been listening to the So Walter Jones Show. I thank you. And tune in again tomorrow for the Sunday School lesson. I think Deconstructing is about to kick up some dust. Grandmama, you hear me in the background, right? Get in the couch, lay down, and take some sleeping pills, because you don't want to hear this. Young folks about to party in your house. Go to bed, Grandmama. Deconstructing right now. So Walter Jones Show. Okay. Okay. Thank you. What was I saying? Oh. Abraham was talking to God. Elohim. God the Father. Adonai. Okay? Yahweh. Y'all call him Jehovah, but it's Yahweh. And it was talking about a covenant, and he split those animals in half. God walked through it. Put Abraham in a dream, a vision. Made him have a vision, okay? Let me read this right quick. Let's not forget. If there was such thing, I know. Okay, so I read that. He's also closed himself off from the public, which makes it worse. Yes, being uninformed bears both, and that's it. Abraham is asleep. God says, your people are going to be strangers in a territory. And they are going to be enslaved for 400 years. God told him, 400 years. Go to Genesis. It was repeated in Acts chapter 7 because there were deacons that were selected. We call them deacons. 7 men full of the Holy Ghost. And Stephen began to preach the gospel and talk about what happened in Genesis chapter 15 of the enslavement of Abraham's people. Okay? Y'all still with me? That was Genesis 15. And then the next chapter starts with Sarah being barren in a sense, okay? There were no children at the time. Then we see where the 2 children came on the scene, all right? Ishmael, and then, of course, Isaac. Ishmael was a tricky situation, and we see those 2 fighting over there in the Middle East right now. That's the whole fight right now. Ishmael and Jacob are fighting. But nevertheless, Jacob is born. He's the promised child. All right. God was setting Abraham up, because what he was doing was taking the people through a dispensation of time. Now, this may be what's going on, or what might have happened with African Americans, or the Africans coming over to America. I believe that God was in the detail. I have no proof, but God is not asleep. He's not asleep. And I believe that he could have possibly been taking us through a dispensation as well. Okay? And so Jacob was born, and then Jacob, of course, worked 7 years and another 7 years because he wanted Rachel, and then Leah came on the scene in that whole story. And then he began to have all these babies. These babies became the 12 tribes of Israel. Well, one of the children's name was Joseph. Joseph was not the baby. We make him the baby, but he was not. Benjamin was the baby. Okay, blessings to you, Janine Joe. And Joseph, the brother with the coat of many colors, was the person who God spent a lot of time on. He was using Joseph to usher the Jews into the next dispensation. And Joseph's story lines up with Jesus' story. And if you go to my YouTube channel, you'll see where I put Joseph and Jesus together, and I made a list of about, 10, maybe 20 things that Joseph encountered and Jesus encountered. From their names down to their brethren, to the clothes, to everything, okay? Joseph is a type of Jesus, just like Joshua or Yeshua is a type of Jesus, okay? Going somewhere here. Joseph was not loved by his brothers because Joseph had a dream. And he looked into heavens and saw these stars. And he told this dream to his brothers, and the brothers, first of all, was jealous for two reasons. Number one, they was jealous because of the father, how he loved Joseph so much. And number two, Joseph had this dream that really peed them off even more. And even the father was told this dream that even Joseph would be even dominant even over the father, and the father even laughed at it. He had to go. And of course, we know that they decided to kill him, and one brother says, let's not do that. And down the well he go, and then they saw a band of whatever they were, thieves or salesmen or whatever they were, and they took him out of the well and sold him gave them to them, and they sold them into. Anyway, God was setting Joseph up to save his people, to put his people in bondage. Ooh-wee. It's crazy. I mean, it's crazy. Joseph was given to these bandits. The brothers go back and lie to the father, had the coat with the blood on it. The bandits take him to Pharaoh. Man, something else. And then Joseph is a dreamer. God used the initial dream before bondage to get him put in bondage, and then use that dream to make him second in command. Or he's there with Potiphar's wife, with Potiphar that is, and then we know what Potiphar's wife did, and then now he's in the dungeon, something, and then God used him to dream again to get him out of the dungeon, make him second in command. Why? Because where the father and the brothers were, there was famine in the land. There was no food. So what God knew was there was going to be famine. So how he was going to rescue the people was he had to put Joseph in bondage, put him in jail, shake him up, make him second in command to Pharaoh, and then go and rescue his brothers and family. How do you think the Jews got to Egypt? Oh, man. It's something. But they didn't recognize the brother. He didn't look like them. He looked like an Egyptian. He probably had that whole Egyptian. He had the Egyptian cloth. He had that whole Egyptian hair, the head, okay, all that. He probably had the scepter, everything. He looked like them. They didn't recognize him, even though that was their brother. How did they recognize him, though? He had to show his mark to them. There's so many lessons, there's so many sermons out of this. He showed them his mark. Not up here, the mark down there. Jesus did the same thing. He came before his brethren, and his brethren said, So he had to show him his, oh, Lord. As Jesus was put on the bondage, but come on, Jehoshaphat, Bright, you can't be teaching this with me. Joseph is my favorite Old Testament person. Yes. So now he's sitting, and then when they recognize them, they crying. He crying too, and they weeping, and he said, now go get my father and everybody else and bring them over here. And they came over to Egypt, and they was now they went from trying to figure out how we're going to eat to eating plenty in the land of Egypt. They begin to have babies, multiply, and then Joseph dies. And then the Bible says there was a Pharaoh that did not understand the covenant that Joseph had with the first Pharaoh. You see, Pharaoh was not his name. Pharaoh was his title. And there was a Pharaoh that did not know Joseph. And that Pharaoh says, they're getting too plentiful. That's what God, his prophecy came in. Because he says, we got to get rid of these. And they begin to enslave them. All right? Now, they lived in the land of Goshen, which was like a suburb. And the Bible says, while there was so much chaos going on in Egypt and famine, The Bible says while they was in Goshen, they was plentiful. So even in a slave situation, God could cause prosperity to happen even in bondage. And the master seemed like they got it all, but really it's the slave. This is too delicate for some of you. Yes, Johanna, he showed him his circumcision. Oh man, this is too delicate. This is too delicate. I think one of the great comments came from Deanne Matthews on my wall today. And here's what Deanne says, as I'm going to go ahead and shut it down. I know y'all been here, y'all here long enough. She says, my question was, were the slaves were the Hebrews enslaved for 400 years? Were they there for 400 years as a choice? Or was it because God punished them? And her answer was neither. Neither was it their choice to be enslaved, or neither did God punish them. And here's her answer. It's quite intricate. She says, when the Lord told Abraham that his descendants would be enslaved, he also mentioned why they would be kept out that long. Again, Genesis chapter 15, you got to read it all. She says, and she quotes, the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full. The Amorites. Who are the Amorites? Not until that happened could Abraham's descendants serve an eviction notice on the present inhabitants of the land. So God allowed the Egyptians to be the reason why, God's choice, not man. Now it can be inferred that many of the children of Israel, sometime before slavery happened, adopted the religion of Egypt because Moses had to ask how he could introduce God to his own people in Exodus 3. And because of the golden calf incident later, there was also a reference to the fact of their idolatry in Ezekiel. Oh, man. Yes, as a choice, I believe, agreed, slavery came upon them. Okay? And that's right there, Johanna, that's right there, can be shaky right there. Here's the thing. I'm leaning on both of y'all. I'm kind of leaning on both of y'all, and both of them need more explanation. I believe that while they were in Egypt, they began to take on the nature of the Egyptians and the spirit of the Egyptians like we Christians do here in America. We take on the world's nature and its culture and its spirit. So in a sense, we who are Christians are in bondage ourselves. Yeah. Idol. It's idol worship. So the Jews were there. They were there for 400 some years. I think it was about 430. And then God finally allowed them to be released because God hardened Pharaoh's heart. Don't forget that. They could have left a long time ago. God could have just said, y'all, but God kept hardening. Could that be the case of American slavery, though? Did God harden America's heart to keep the African slave that long? This is challenging. But then the mentality of the Hebrews in Egypt was a slave mentality. How do we know? Because when they were freed, when they come out, God gave them riches. They had no need, and when he took them out, none of them were sick. Took them out. And then they went to the wilderness and began to complain. Moses went to speak to the Lord on the mountain, and he was gone too long. And then what did they do? They then, because the Bible says there were strangers that left with the Jews, because it was time for the Passover. And if strangers live in your house, don't kick them out. Let them take Passover too. Put the blood over the doorpost, and I will pass over you. All right. And when they came out, the strangers went with them. Who were these strangers? Ooh, that's a whole nother show. And then they thought that God had abandoned them. And what did they do? They called for these Egyptian folk to help them go back to that mentality of slave and bondage, and they built the calf. And they even said, we had it better in Egypt. Let's go back to Egypt and get back under Pharaoh's arms of bondage. That was the American slave. Many of them were. That's why she carried that rifle. Don't be unequally yoked just doesn't apply to marriage. Come on, Tony. And then Deanne says in this last statement, if the line of inference holds, you would have a situation in which the children of Israel, in their early prosperity in Egypt, abandoned God's integrate with Egyptian society. As a result, the Lord allowed the Egyptians to enslave them, and thus the slavery was the punishment. Therefore, if the line of inference holds, I wouldn't be as concerned about how the situation relates to the first period of African slaves in America. I would be concerned that it predicts a second period of African enslavement in America, a period already started in our prisons and slowly growing stronger and more prevalent while we are not paying attention in the churches and entertainments. Okay? So there is a new Jim Crow law, new Jim Crow that is, and there is a prison industrial complex that has set up shop in America. And so we are involved in crimes, and because we're enslaved in the mind, we keep blaming the man for everything. We haven't pulled ourselves up by our own bootstraps. And so it's difficult to get Black Wall Street back up because we are enslaved in the minds. We have project mentality. We're pulling in from the government for help, for whether it's food and clothing and raiment, medical, everything. We pull from the government for everything. All right. And so if we're pulling from the government for everything, then the government have a sense that they do own you. Okay. And then you have a sense of entitlement to it. All right. I believe a particular political party has caused us to be in that position. And then our children are, and some of us have gotten in trouble with the law, and there we are in the prisons. The system is set up to put us in prison, and then the system is set up to keep us in prison because there's money to be made in these private prisons, right? So slavery ended in one way, but it continued in another way. Yes. 1986, the three-time loser law mandated prison terms for menial crimes. Yep, absolutely. Who was it? Lyndon Baines Johnson launched the what did he call it? A war on poverty. The war on poverty and the war on drugs both was a direct attack to African Americans. It did just as much harm as it did any good. And what did it do? It removed the father from the home. The public aid system was initiated, and the father had to go. And there's one reason why so many single women in America. And then the war on drugs was a direct attack to you as well. Because a white guy and a black guy could take the same drug, you going down. The white guy's drug is more expensive. The black guy's drug is some cheap crack. But the punishment on the cheap crack puts you in prison longer than the expensive powder substance that the white guy can afford. Yeah. So, mass incarceration, African Americans. So then, those people who were voting for Donald Trump to get in office are the ones who see the narrative, who saw on TV the statistics from Fox News, all these black people in prison, but they didn't hear why they're in prison. Yeah. There are less than 50 black men for every 100 black women, 99 white men for every 100 white woman fact. Yeah. And so the narrative you hear about black on black crime is amazing because crime is proximity. Black people don't go into white neighborhoods and kill them. White people don't come to the black neighborhoods and kill them. Black people kill who's in proximity to them. White people kill who's in proximity to them. And white on white crime is huge, but you never hear that term. There are more white people, they're still the majority, there's still more white people in America than there are black people. So white on white crime is huge, but why is it always called black on black crime? Here it is. This is slavery right here. It's systematic. So is Kanye West right? Well, rewind this tape and you'll hear the whole matter. If you have a prison record, you have to prove you can vote. Oh, I know. I know. So there you have it. Hit the share button if you can. If you're on YouTube, go ahead and hit that bell. Bing! Subscribe and let's talk about this further, if we may. Kanye ain't done. He's got more he's going to say. The next time he opens his mouth and says something incorrect, just say, well, that's Kanye. But don't be silent on it because he's got a huge following, and some of those following are in your house. And you sit with your kids and say, listen, I know you respect Kanye. You hear his every word and a whim. Here's the truth. And then you take the kids to Google because that's where they live, and you show them the statistics and show them the facts. And he says, Kanye said this, here are the facts. You see this? And if they don't understand it, explain it to them. All right? Just say, Kanye had a bad day. All right? Here it is. Because you may not be able to get the kids to stop listening to Kanye, but you can get them to listen to you. Get a better relationship with your children. Yeah. Shantae Charles, hey, just finished a show on this. See? So I guess I got to rewind your show, and you rewind mine, and then we come together on some notes, and then we need to do a show together to put a jot in the tittle level. All right, y'all. Let's hope he thinks before he speaks next time. Joanna Bright, you got the last word. Let's pray and hope that he thinks before he speaks. But I will say, again, I believe he's dealing with anxiety issues, hypersensitive. He's very hypersensitive, and these are traits. I believe this might be in the HDSM, what do you call that thing? The manual, the statistical manual for mental illness manual. I believe, where are they at? They at number 5 or number 6 now? I don't remember, but I believe he's hypersensitive. Part paranoia, I believe. He's definitely he has narcissistic traits. I'm not a doctor. I only play one on television. But Dr. Oz was on there today. He's a doctor, and he kind of said what I said. He believes that he has those traits, but it's kind of hard to diagnose a person if they're not in your presence. Although in 1960s, psychologists did try and diagnose Barry Goldwater. See, I'm old, y'all. I'm sorry. The history keeps popping up. Thank you, Essence, the DSM-5. They had 5 now. They'll be on 6 by tomorrow, trust me. Barry Goldwater seemed to be mentally ill. And he was running for president of the United States against who? Was it Richard Nixon? And so they came together and they decided that you cannot diagnose a person with mental illness just by looking at him on television. And so when you Google the Barry Goldwater, the psychologists from around the world has come together and decided that they even call it something. But then when Donald Trump got elected, they're now, psychologists are now coming together and talking more about this Barry Goldwater ruling thing, and that they're trying to reverse it because they're realizing there's a trait in Donald Trump, like Goldwater. and that we can't just emphatically just ignore it, and he have to be in my office and I got to ask him these questions for me to realize that this man has a mental illness. Even the scriptures even says you know a tree by the fruit it bears. So I believe he has Kanye West there's a disorder. It might have happened after his mother's death, or it might have happened before his mother's death. The mother's death might have gave it some life, but it might have been there. Yeah. Until someone is trained to kind of let them lay on the couch. It's my truth. All right, y'all. It stopped hailing outside. I'm going to go out here and enjoy the summer, which came late. But it's here. It's not really summer. It's spring-like. Because next week we'll be back down to the 60s, which is the regular, what it's supposed to be in America. Chicago, sorry. All right. Thank you, guys. I appreciate you. Hit the share button and educate the people about this. The Miseducation of Kanye West. I want to talk about this week depression. I'm getting a lot of saints who are battling with depression. I know I had a battle with it, and I want to talk about it. Y'all ever smell rain? Ooh, that smells good. There's nothing like a fresh smell of fresh rain. I want to talk about depression. I want to do a show on that. I will be in Indianapolis Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, so I probably will do a remote show there for my annual seminars and retreat that I do there. So, depression among the saints. Can we talk about it? Maybe y'all can read up on it a little bit and help me teach that lesson. Depression is huge, and there's a whole lot of people who inbox me and call me and tell me they're battling with depression right now. And they're Christians, they're evangelists and missionaries and pastors, and they're struggling with this. So let's talk about that. That's this week, and then we'll talk about relationships and why is it that y'all are afraid of your spouses. There's a fear that's happening. All right, Essence, love you. Thank you for that information. You are definitely a huge asset. All right, y'all. This is Sir Walter Jones Show.